Hey everybody, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Got a very good stream, I think, for you here on Wednesday night. I am joined by one of my favorite guests, but haven't had him on in a while. Good to have him back, Charlemagne. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be back and speak with you once more.
Yeah, for anyone who's not aware, Charlemagne has an excellent YouTube channel that luckily is now back from the brink of annihilation. So we're glad that all those valuable videos have returned. But he also has his own Substack, and he also writes on the old Glory Club Substack, which we'll be looking at tonight. So make sure you're checking out his stuff below. I've got links to the article we're going to be referencing and all of that. So make sure that you're following him and everything. But wanted to talk tonight because, like I said, Charlemagne had a great little piece over on the Old Glory Club Substack, kind of about democracy and how it has evolved and how kind of the rituals uh, around it have evolved to kind of include this kind of mystical obfuscated element where we don't really know what's coming next, but it's still important to kind of be involved in this. So Charlemagne, could you just give the people a little bit of a taste of kind of what you were talking about with the different sacraments and esoteric knowledge of democracy?
Yeah, so the title is supposed to be a little bit humorous, of course. But yeah, so you get this idea from that sort of stems all the way back from, Yarvin's original Unqualified Reservations, where he compares progressivism to a religion and sort of how it's a Christian heresy, basically. And I don't necessarily want to say I was inspired by that per se, but certainly it had a little bit of influence. But I think, as everyone's noticed, democracy is treated like a religious practice in America, especially in 2022. And it actually, if you sort of take a close look at it, it actually possesses most of the components of a religion. So if I just sort of skim through the article, um, you know, I open it by saying it has sacraments, a priestly caste, and the attendant esoteric knowledge. So the main sacrament, of course, in democracy, and I like to use capital D democracy to distinguish it just from a political formula. I think proper nouns are very powerful, and I like to use them in cases like this. The same with the vote, right? Use vote as a capital V sacrament. So that's your most sacred sacrament in democracy is voting. So if you don't vote, people will actually look at you like you've done something wrong. We've sort of progressed past the point in America where it's now not okay to simply not vote. Like, it was always kind of a faux pas to not exercise your, duty as an American citizen to vote, but it didn't have this place it does now, where people really expect you to vote. And the day of midterms, I got asked several times by people whose business it really isn't whether or not I voted, in sort of a scolding tone, actually, like whether or not I voted, which is kind of weird. People expect you to vote, and if you didn't vote, and of course the implication is not only that you voted, but that you voted for the right people. And I guess that's really the core, is that if you're not voting, then they know you're at least not sort of helping progress and democracy, right? You're just sort of abstaining from it, and simply being apolitical now, which used to be okay. Even in my early adulthood, it's now not okay. You now actually have to vote. And as you can see in the article, I sort of compare this ritual of voting, um, as part of the ritual that like maintains your leadership. Like whatever devotional gestures would in ancient cultures, like building pyramids or something like that. Um, so I compare it to a state of sin, right? If you don't vote, it's kind of like not confessing in the Catholic Church. Is you must vote. Period. There's not It's not okay to not vote. Um, so yeah, I guess that's the first point. Do you want to stop at any point there?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to just jump in and say that I I think it's really interesting. Of course, we all know that every government is going to need a legitimating mechanism, right? And today, a lot of times, people like us who might reference a system like monarchy, people are like, well, no one will ever believe in the divine right of kings, right? Like, no one will ever believe in anything that ridiculous. But then we see the kind of behavior you're talking about now, where it's absolutely essential that you've done kind of your sacred civic duty to kind of give the assent to the regime. And if you don't, it's not enough, like you said, to abstain. I remember, when I was in high school or college, it was the anarchists, or it was the edgy socialist kids or communist kids or whatever. Like, they didn't vote because voting didn't matter, man, and the parties were all the same. And this was a constant thing that radical leftists or activists would say. And so, like, voting made you a sucker, right? And today it's absolutely essential to kind of the progressive faith. It's impossible to imagine a world in which, like, leftists are not driving people to this constantly. And also, it's really interesting that you have this obsession with the idea. Oh, I was going to jump to something else. What was I going to say? I may have lost the next part here, but this is the part I really liked about what you're saying. So let's get to this, and maybe that'll jog my memory here. But you were talking about how it's moved from the mundane to the esoteric here.
Yeah, this is kind of what spurred me to write the article, particularly that italicized mystery word. You always have sacred mysteries in each religion. Whether it's polytheistic or monotheistic, there's a mystery aspect that is only known in whole or in part by the special priest caste. And I sort of noticed when you think about the political appointments that just happened, the way that those appointments, the procedures that actually produce those appointments, are sort of no longer really known. They're just mysterious, and you'll see some warnings from the media about this, about how it's going to take n days to complete the mystery esoteric processes that are going to produce the outcomes. Whereas before it was sort of just a tabulation process. It was very empirical. You get the counting done, and then you have your outcome. It may have even been done on paper and not in these computer machines, which add their own mystery component to it. So this is sort of what really elevates it to a proper religion, I think, is the actual mystery aspect of it, where not only we don't really understand the process anymore, and it's not only that, but you as a non-priest are not really allowed to actually even think about how that process is working, and then maybe question it or think if it should be changed or something like that. That's simply disallowed. You must accept the sacred mysteries of the religion democracy, period.
Yeah, no, that's where I wanted to touch on. I agree that uh, it's very interesting the way that this has shifted from something. Democracy was supposed to be kind of the demystification of the governance process, right? That this was supposed to be the post Enlightenment realization, is that the mystery, the deification, the transcendent had been taken out of the governing process, and now government was by men for men. It was of the people by the people. There was no sacred element. Everything was laid bare in a very a very factual, stripped down manner. The point was to be transparent. The point was to be something that anyone, the average person, could kind of grasp a hold of. And now we're heading back the other direction, like you said, where we've got this mystery aspect, where you have to, when we head into an election now, we regularly get the exact same storyline. I did a tweet where I was just collecting all the different storylines from 2020 and then this election, and just it was the same thing over and over again. This Red Mirage, suddenly we have this fable of the Red Mirage that will rise before every election, and just when the moment seems darkest, when it looks like the evil Republicans or the right wing or the chuds may have overtaken the right and good feeling people, the virtuous people, of the blue of the left, don't worry, because even in that darkest hour, it is only illusion. And in the end, as long as you wait long enough, as long as we count hard enough, as long as we go through kind of the sacred practice long enough, eventually the right people will win. And I just want to make it very clear, because it's that time on YouTube. um I want to make it very clear that we believe all elections are legitimate here. Okay, all elections are legitimate. We're not questioning anything about that. Whatever Susan needs us to believe, we believe. We're just noting the way that the process has evolved over time.
Yes, the elections were the most free and fair in the history of the United States.
Yes, yes, the first one's ever. Well, and we saw this. The I think it was Politico was cutting articles about how voting machines were easy to hack again. Like they did like 2 days before the election, right before. Again, this is Politico, Susan. This is not us. We would never question the validity of voting machines, but the media was. They started rolling those stories out in anticipation of the theoretical red wave. Right before then, we started getting the stories uh, about the Red Mirage. Do you think that they were worried genuinely about this? Do you think they really had worked themselves up into the idea that they were going to lose this election?
My read is that the GOP basically planned to throw the election more or less in order to make President Trump look like he was dragging down the GOP, which I think is pretty much confirmed given the events since the midterms, especially yesterday.
Yeah, it's a very very interesting series of events that have kind of come after this. So obviously, post the election, the narrative. I guess we can get into this, and then we'll get back to democracy, because this is an interesting side direction anyway. But we've been there have been a lot of, hey, this is evidence that Trump is a poison pill, that the direction of the but and not just Trump, but the direction of the Republican Party in general, the America First direction of the party has been a disaster, and everybody needs to moderate immediately so Republicans have a chance to kind of return back to this. We've seen the wedge. They're trying to drive the wedge between DeSantis and Trump constantly here. And I'll just say my piece here on it, because I've said it on Twitter enough, but I haven't really mentioned it on the channel in a little bit. So I just want to make it clear what I think is the situation with Trump and DeSantis. I think DeSantis is a far more valuable model as a governor, and how to build regional power and how to build these separate power bases, than he is running into the Washington machine. And so while I like DeSantis, I think DeSantis is good. I think he is a positive force in general. I don't think he's the guy, and I don't think Trump is the guy. I don't think either of them are the guy, sadly. And so I think DeSantis is more valuable doing what he's doing right now, and Trump is more valuable doing what he does best, which is just smashing the media head, into the media head first. And so that's why, while I like DeSantis a lot, I don't want him to run. I don't want him to run, and I think the people using DeSantis right now are specifically using him as a wedge. I don't think he's a plant. I don't think he's controlled opposition, but I think I think there's a lot of people. David French is one of the ones that immediately comes to mind, who hated this guy, who were dumping on him. The National Review types, when DeSantis was battling Disney, and they're all like, "My free market, my free market." Like, I think that all these people who are suddenly rushing to DeSantis' side, I think this is a tactic to destroy kind of the populist energy, the America First energy of the party. These people are vultures. They all want back in. They all know that they were kind of on the outs of the party, and where the direction the party was going. And they all see this as the opportunity to kind of just destroy something that they couldn't control. And they know the best way to do that is just to divide these people and set them against each other. I don't know if you can stop kind of the confrontation at this point, but I think that is the general plan of a lot of these establishment types.
Yeah, I mostly agree with what you said there. I guess if you want to comment a bit further, I mean,
Mhm.
I think in terms of the presidency, Trump is at least a safe choice, especially given the state of the world right now with Russia and Ukraine. I think if there's one thing we can say about President Trump is that he doesn't seem to particularly be a warmonger president like a lot of these other guys are in both the GOP and the Democrats. And I think in this profoundly unsafe environment, it's probably better to actually have, ironically, someone with a cooler head in the game. I mean, I could see Trump sort of bringing the Ukraine conflict to a negotiated settlement that would actually be mutually beneficial for basically all parties involved. And obviously, the regime can't really have that.
Yeah, I think again, people will point to all kinds of problems with Trump, and they'll be right about every one of them. I'm not. I mean, he was terrible on COVID. I mean, he deployed military forces or didn't understand that military forces continue to be deployed even after he asked them to be stepped down or removed. So like there are certainly flaws with Trump. Like there's no argument with that. But I think in general, um, they that I don't think they'll let him back in to the White House. I really I think even though that would be the wise move for them, I think the left is so unhinged with Trump, and you saw this with his announcement stuff, right? Like we already saw all these stories about like NPR was running stories like election denier and the guy who raised a mob to attack Congress, Donald Trump runs for president again. Like these people are already making these kind of just unhinged announcements. Like this is just what Trump does to them. So I don't think, even if though it would be smart for them to just kind of allow that to happen, I don't think they will. But either way, I think that Trump, at least if he was in, like you said, would have kind of a cooler head. And again, ironically, when it came to foreign policy, again, I don't know where DeSantis is really on foreign policy. He's a governor. He hasn't had to make those kind of decisions. He hasn't had to declare those positions. Maybe he would be great on that stuff. We just don't know. But like I said, I really prefer him in kind of the position that he's in. But let's get back. Well, oh, I guess we could talk about before we move back to the article. We could talk about the Senate leadership and the GOP leadership, right? So we go through this whole thing. Republicans have a terrible showing compared to expectations. The red wave doesn't materialize; it fizzles out. Really, only guys like DeSantis and Rubio in Florida look like Florida is really the only place where we see the kind of shift we expected to see. Um, and uh, and this red wave doesn't materialize. And Mitch McConnell, who like denied money to really important races, including races like Blake Masters, they he gets ripped apart. Everybody says he's terrible. Everybody hates him, and he just gets reconfirmed as the Senate, I guess, minority leader now. But he gets reconfirmed into leadership. So all these people are like, we're going to punish McConnell. We're going to do this. Like, we're going to be able to kind of take this back. I mean, what does that mean for the GOP as a vehicle for populism or dissidence or change if they can't even punish incredibly establishment leadership that everyone really identifies as garbage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically says, well, Thomas 777 mentioned this on Twitter, that voting these people out of office, and he was talking about the elder McCain here who passed away recently. Obviously, he was talking about how it's basically as impossible to actually vote these people out of office as it would be like some sort of East German functionary during the Cold War. Like it's just not really possible. I've been a little critical of Masters in terms of, I think a lot of these post-Trump candidates are sort of just repeating like warmed over Trumpism, and I'm not really sure that that's good enough to. I mean, that's just kind of boring. I mean, Trump did that himself in his announcement, but I'm not really sure. no matter how much money they had, if it's actually possible for these people to win the elections, if you take my meaning.
Yeah, I mean the point of voting out is an excellent one. Oh, by the way, I'll be over on the Old Glory Club YouTube channel on Friday with the Prudentialist and I believe others discussing President Trump's announcement speech. So make sure you go over and subscribe to the Old Glory Club uh, uh, YouTube channel as well, the Substack, because we'll be doing stuff over there. Actually, this also might be a good time to stop and explain to people what is the Old Glory Club for people who might not have heard about it.
Yeah, the Old Glory Club is a group of American gentlemen who have decided to organize a social club, a social institution for us to communicate within, and you know, really publish content as well, and sort of go through a thought process with each other to try and figure out a new political settlement for Americans. You can sort of think of the Old Glory Club as one of these older institutions in which some of the founders would, I hesitate to say Freemasonry, right? But because obviously that's going to trigger people. But think of it sort of
Mhm.
like that, without all the heretical religious aspects. Just think of it about a club where gentlemen thinkers meet and produce work with each other in order to sort of further our ideas and further the interests of our country.
Yeah, then you've got a couple people who are going to be writing over there and regularly doing YouTube appearances. I believe the Distributist was on the last one, if I saw correctly, along with people like the Prudentialist and Closington. I think was on there too, wasn't he? I
Yeah,
think.
he was.
Yeah,
I think he was on the stream. I mean,
I
he's
think he
definitely a
was.
member, and
Yeah.
yeah, someone in chat pointed out it's a fraternal organization is the shorter way to put it.
There you go. So yeah, make sure you're checking that out, guys. But I do think that it's interesting. I wonder because the whole debate has been post this election again, this throwdown between kind of establishment GOP and the American First people. And is it candidate quality? Do people need to moderate? Is that going to change anything? And then it just being completely unable to hold Mitch McConnell of all people accountable. And then the fact that the Senate is pushing forward with kind of the ceiling, kind of the same sex marriage bill. I wonder, is any of this gonna, I mean, I should know the answer to this, but I'll throw you the softball. Like, is any of this gonna change anything, or is anyone gonna wake into this? Is at least the American First crowd, if no one else, gonna become disillusioned with this process?
I think America First is just kind of sandbagged at this point and isn't really going to do anything but become the rightmost wing of the GOP. Um, I mean, if you look back to 2015, um, if you look at the most radical elements of the right and the alt right, they sort of made the mistake of believing that they were influencing things, that they had a seat at the table, that they were influencing Trump. I think at this point, the sort of people on the right who aren't part of the mainstream um, sort of understand that we don't have a seat at the table. Um, Populism does not work. We're not going to red pill a bunch of people and somehow, um, totally shift the political formula in America. But maybe we can use Trump season version 2 to sort of try and get our ideas to some elites. Maybe someone like Tucker Carlson. I know people have mixed opinions about him, but he definitely seems receptive to the types of things that Old Glory Club and other people and organizations are saying. So I think the best we can hope for is to just try and get our ideas directly to the elites. And I think one of the best ways to do that actually is on Substack, which sort of has it's sort of a level above YouTube, I guess. I mean, Yarvin has clearly demonstrated that it's the more aristocratic platform, right? I mean, that's just kind of how I would describe it, and that's where you need to be writing for if you want to reach elites. and it's not really YouTube. But YouTube is still important for getting messages out. But nothing. I don't think anything's really going to change. Even if Trump wins and he serves a full term, I don't really think we're going to see much change. So I would suggest, like, don't look for that in terms of the results of any of your intellectual output. It's really only to try and push these ideas to select individuals.
Yeah, I think you're right about kind of the situation with YouTube and Substack, and I still think YouTube is valuable. It still provides community in a way that Substack doesn't exactly. Like Substack kind of has community, but I think YouTube is really there for kind of the community aspect, and then of course people do enjoy listening. It allows you to mow a lawn or lift weights or play a video game or whatever, and still kind of absorb knowledge. I still do a lot of stuff that way, so it's very valuable in that way. But Substack really has that ability to break through. I've been surprised where some of my Substack stuff has ended up and who's reading it and where it goes. There's just something about it that it does feel like that's where the energy's at. That's where a lot of people are seeking new ideas. And obviously the fact that it's not censored in the way that YouTube is. You could say things on Substack that will get you banned on YouTube. And you can monetize and do all kinds of things on Substack that still allow that to be a and I'm sure at some point they'll come for that too. It's only a matter of time, but at least up to this point, the Substack crew has been pretty impressive in their unwillingness to kind of fold under pressure and that kind of thing. So it's amazing. Pretty much anyone at this point, even people who've been decrying Substack, have Substack, and the fact that they kind of cross pollinate with a bunch of people who aren't known, who aren't mainstream, but also get referenced and also pulled in and become part of the conversation. Kind of gives it an old Twitter-esque feel where kind of anybody can get into the game if they can shake it up a little bit. But yeah, Substack has been very valuable for that. I want to go ahead and hit another part of this here because you talk about the scientists and the experts, and this isn't going to be anybody who's listened to either of us at this point is going to kind of heard variations on this. But I like that you point out that the kind of the biggest danger of Trump, or one of his big dangers, is he's not kind of listening to this class, right? Like, and that really came through. If you remember, I don't know if you remember the Sam Harris appearance where he's like, yeah, no, I totally support. I don't care if Joe Biden has dead children in his attic. I support Joe Biden over Donald Trump. But one of the things he really hit on, one of the reasons he justified like his statements like that, was saying that Trump doesn't listen to people like him. He doesn't listen to the expert class, and that's what makes Trump more dangerous than anything else. Like all the other stuff, they don't like. They don't like the way he talks. They don't like some of his attitudes. But what they hate the most is Trump's disregard for the expert class, and is willing to kind of make decisions without the blessing of kind of the new priestly caste.
Yeah, so democracy, the religion, isn't just some abstract form. It has a direction, right? And that direction is scientific, rational government, which was actually, I would say, developed by the British to some extent in running their empire. They sort of had to categorize all these different parts of the world in some sort of objective system in order to make any sense of it. But anyway, so the scientific rational government, right? That's sort of the guiding principle to how democracy is supposed to operate. So the politicians who are elected are expected to act within that frame to forward science. Just like a priest can't just behave however he wants; he has to act within the doctrine of the church. So politicians have to act within the doctrine of scientific rational government. And you could think of the scientist actually as the person who interprets scientific scripture. And you even have these sort of mystery aspects to that as well, such as peer review and publication in a journal. How do those things even happen? Who's even doing the review? It's kind of a mystery. It's another mystery process to most people. how these things actually work and how this scientific scripture is actually being written. And one of the weird things I noticed, and this is, I guess, another thing that made me want to write this article, is that even when talking to people on the right, you'll hear people say like, "Well, I'm not a scientist," right? Like on something, like if you're talking about some scientific topic, it doesn't even have to be like political. It could just be talking about astrophysics or something. People will say, "Well, I'm not a scientist," but for pretty much any other topic, people are totally fine having opinions on stuff without having any expertise, right? Like, um, oh hey, sorry about that. But yeah, people will totally without being trained in the matter. But so people will talk about how policing should be done, how government should be run, all of the stuff. But when it comes to like science, people will not. They will say, "Look, I'm not a scientist." So basically, they acknowledge that they're not allowed to have their own opinions effectively because they are not trained in the esoteric mysteries of the science. Like the church, right? It's the same, like our friend Luke Avery, who does the Lambda Bible Studies channel on YouTube, right? Like he's not a priest, right? So he's sort of like not on the same level, and it doesn't matter if how much knowledge someone might have about scripture. There's a certain extent to which people will not actually accept that simply because you haven't been trained by the formal institutions that give you credibility. And of course, Moldbug calls this the cathedral, right, which is the university system and its auxiliaries. So there are plenty of scientists and engineers, etc., on YouTube who sort of they might be autodidactically trained and they're incredibly knowledgeable, and yet because they are alternatively trained and not trained by the religious institution, not considered ordained, right? You're not ordained as an expert, and people will discount your opinion. And again, like I said, I notice people left or right tend to actually acknowledge this. Like kind of everyone acknowledges that certain areas are basically off limits if you're not like formally trained in it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think, especially when it comes to like pointing out the willingness of people to talk about something like policing, right? Like you'll have people who are totally willing to make like complete idiots of themselves by saying, "Oh, like abolish the police or defund the police." People who don't understand anything about crime rates or any of this stuff are happy to wade into that discussion without any kind of hesitation and make just complete idiots of themselves publicly. But if you mention anything that is supposed to fall into like the most basic realm of science, all of a sudden there's this massive amount of deference that comes with it. So people are completely happy to talk, directly out of their butt about things they have no idea about, even very complex issues of governance or philosophy or all kinds of other things. But when it comes to science, all of a sudden there's this immediate halt, and yeah, this I need to say the acknowledge now that I don't have the necessary expertise, and I guess that's probably due to the way that that barrier has been so studiously kept, like the way people are so publicly defenestrated if they step over that line and made a fool of. No one is sitting around mocking publicly, or at least no one in real, no one gets on the View to mock AOC for her statements about defunding the police. But if you say something wrong about science, your Republican congressman who says something stupid about science, they'll spend 20 minutes mocking you in a segment. And so I think that there's a reason that line has been drawn in particular, though that does become very interesting when it comes to issues of then like gender ideology. Not to do the trust the science meme. Like it's very obvious that um the left does not actually care about that. But it is interesting that while it is very important to be very exact and qualified on the science in many areas, there are some areas of science where you can ignore all the literature and all the understanding entirely. In fact, there are many areas of science where you are absolutely required to do so, something that guys like Charles Murray learned at a very high cost.
One thing I'll add here, just a sort of a side point, is the way peer review works. If you look into it, is actually pretty interesting. I guess interesting in that it works kind of how you expect, is where journals basically keep like a list of experts in the field, sort of not on retainer necessarily, but they basically have like a list of people they go to in order to read articles or papers on specific topics. So I think most people probably view peer review as sort of this general process where like it's just open to everyone, right? Like every scientist just sort of reviews every other scientist all the time. But that's not really how it works. I mean, for one, journals only have particular things they're interested in publishing because they're a private business and they want to publish exciting things. And then two, it's really a selection of scientists that actually perform the formal peer review process. And then once it's in the journal, it's in the journal, and that's it. So it's not really this sort of big open. It's not Karl Popper's open society or something where it's um, where like everyone with expertise in the field like has a chance to contribute. That's actually not how it works. It works in the same like bureaucratic way as basically all the other arms of the cathedral do. So just wanted to point that out as well.
I was going to say, you mean even this smaller microcosm of a democratic system actually turns out to be an oligarchy and a closely
Yeah,
held?
exactly.
If only there was some kind of law to describe this, regular feature of organization. But yeah, big surprise that's actually how it works. So the piece isn't super long, guys, and this one isn't going to be a really long stream. I mean, we could drag it out a little bit and rib on democracy if we really want to. Some people haven't heard us make all of our anti-democracy arguments. But I don't feel like we have to belabor that point too much for people here. So if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask, they can go ahead and throw that out. I see we've got a few super chats stacking up, so we'll jump over that to for 1 second. But Charlemagne, where should people be checking your stuff out if they want to see what you're up to? You got anything that you're working on in the hopper, or just the new article?
Mainly the Old Glory Club right now. So that's oldgloryclub.substack.com. And then you can also search Old Glory Club on YouTube to find our content there. Of course, I do have my YouTube channel, which I was frantically unprivating videos on since you shilled it, as I had them all set to private. I don't necessarily have anything planned right there. My main thing right now is really Substack. So I have my own Substack, charlemagne.substack.com, where I also do paid articles if you want to support me specifically. So my work is kind of going to be split between that and Old Glory Club articles and the occasional stream. As far as Old Glory Club's schedule goes, we're looking to release video content every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And there will be a stream this Friday, actually, that I think you're actually planning on being on, which is very cool. And then we will also have articles releasing every Monday and Wednesday, hopefully.
Excellent. So good content schedule over there, guys. Make sure you're following Charlemagne's individual stuff. And as always, make sure you're following all tech stuff, Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, whatever. Just make sure you've got points of contact, because we've seen stuff like Charlemagne's channel and everything that happened with that. You never know what's going to happen with these platforms. Luckily, all that got resolved because he didn't do anything wrong and it was just stupid. But you never know when these people are gonna do something dumb. So just make sure that you're subbing to all those different platforms, so that if someone like Charlemagne's excellent work gets taken down, you've got a place to find it. Make sure you're checking out a Substack and everything here. So let's see. I've got Glow in the Dark here for $5. Thank you very much, sir. Glow in the Dark says McConnell wants to be the only leader. DeSantis should stay in Florida to make it a feudal red state. When we need to, then we need to replicate it in other states. I mean, certainly, there seems to be something winning happening in Florida, right? And there's a lot of speculation as to what that is. I think part of it is certainly DeSantis's example. I think another big part of that is, and a lot of people have made this point, and it's a fair point. There's been a lot of migration down to Florida, right? Especially given the COVID stuff. That was, I mean, pretty much, I think everyone who was talking about liking DeSantis in Florida was because of his stance with COVID and his unwillingness to kind of involve himself in some of those bans. Obviously, he did do some of the stuff at the beginning, so he's not perfect. No one was kind of in those situations, I don't think, at this point. But he did do better than most. So I think that was a big deal. A lot of people from New York and others who probably would have made that move anyway, were encouraged to do so, given kind of the COVID situation. So that might have been a once in a generation thing. That might have been a one time thing that flooded the state with red voters, and we won't see it again. But I think it is part of a general move. I think there is a general move in Florida. Now, very interesting, and Charlemagne might pick your brain on this too, because I meant to ask you about it earlier. What do you think about the red Hispanic shift? Right, we had a lot of people saying that this is happening. This is going to be big. This is going to be a huge sea change. And the fact that this is not a monolithic left wing vote is going to really shake things up. And we saw some move in that direction, with kind of the last Trump election. But then in the midterm here, the only place we really saw that significantly was Florida, where it did seem to happen. I mean, Miami-Dade went red, which is huge if you're not familiar with the area. But what do you think about this possibility? Do you think that's just a Florida specific thing, or do you think that could be a wider movement?
Well, there are ebbs and flows in political trends. I think Hispanics will probably more or less end up voting similarly to whites, especially depending on what state they're in. I think expecting some sort of huge shift to suddenly happen because of Hispanic voters just isn't really realistic. As you have a growing Hispanic middle class, they're probably going to end up voting a lot more like the white little middle class. And I think this is sort of a silver bullet that some people are looking for. Like, if we just wait long enough, the based Hispanics will sort of figure out the game, and then they'll start voting for the GOP. I mean, I just don't see that happening. It's going to be business as usual with that group.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think you're seeing a shift as kind of another generation and more middle class people enter into that demographic, and so you do see a shift to the Republican side. But I don't think you'll ever see like a complete turnover. I think it will stay a majority left wing, a majority Democrat voting block. That just it just won't be as monolithic as, say, the African American vote. So like you're gonna have you're gonna see more Republicans, and it'll look like Republicans are making gains, and they are in some ways. But I think the idea that like at some point like the GOP will just overwhelm in that demographic is probably unlikely.
I mean, this is a larger conversation, but I'll just say one way you could attract that voter base more, I think, and really any of them. This is a point other people at the Old Glory Club and other friends have made recently, is that the Democrats, treats their voter base like clients, and the GOP does not. I mean, they basically just sort of treat you like a slave, basically. I mean, when you vote Democrat, you actually get something, right? You get something from the government. Usually, it's just money, right? Which is totally fine. I mean, the GOP simply does not reward you for voting for them. It would be very easy for the GOP to do that. I mean, you could have mortgage matching, right? Like if you've had a 30-year mortgage for 10 years and you've lived in the same house that entire time, they'll match all your mortgage payments. Like at this point, people need to drop fiscal conservatism and just be like, make me a client, pay me, and I'll vote for you, basically. And that would actually be huge as a political platform in terms of getting Hispanics and more whites to vote, especially whites, because whites basically get absolutely nothing. Even if you're voting Democrat, right? If you're white, all you get is like the psychic profit of quote unquote doing the right thing. But yeah, I would like to see the GOP sort of adopt the actual client model. And,
Yeah, well, there's a certain
just pay me.
Well, there is a certain percentage that do get it through like the NGO and the university complex, but it has to be of the particular class, right? Like it's certainly
Right, you
not
have to be
based
a
on
Brahmin.
demographics, right?
But
Exactly,
that,
and
but
so
that's just a small subset, right? That's just the elite.
yes, it is. And so yeah, I think you're right. Like this is something I've been trying to blast to like conservatives is like, they're just blown away that like someone like Fetterman can win, that the Democrats can win in a year where like they were central to the COVID narrative, and the gas is so expensive, and inflation is out of control, and they're just like, there's all these issues that in theory, like in traditional kind of election terms, should, in a marketplace of ideas system, impact the way that people are voting. And like at the end of this election, like all of these like mainstream conservative people are like, I don't understand. Like, how does anyone elect Fetterman? Like, how does anyone support this party in the middle of like this terrible recession with inflation and middle stagflation, and these people are winning? And I was just trying to explain to them, like, you don't understand what democracy is. Like, democracy is rewarding your friends and punishing your enemies. And like you're saying, if you are a GOP voter, what do you get? You get the promise that one day they might leave you alone at best. That's like it never happens, but theoretically one day the government might leave you alone. That's all the GOP has to offer anyone, really. And the Democrats are offering stuff. So like you said, it's time for kind of the GOP or the right in general to kind of get just done with like the treasury is being looted, whether you like it or not. So like you're not going to be returning to like, but we're the party of austerity is never going to be your winning message.
Yeah, and I mean if you think about Trump's first term in office, the most popular thing he ever did was pay everyone in the country $1,400 or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Yep. Yeah. Many people speculating about had he been able to do that again, what would have changed? Yeah. So let's see. Glow in the dark here again says Trump needs to be the. Or sorry. Okay, no, this is a different one. Okay, sorry. Trump needs to be the president. DC burned their bridges to him mostly. McConnell stays in power with secret votes. Trump wins in the open. I mean, again, I think Trump is the best tool. I said this on Twitter today. Like, whatever you think of Trump, no matter his flaws, which are real, and you're right about all of them, but just remember, like, Trump is an apex predator who evolved to like just drive the worst people in the world crazy. So I don't know that Trump is going to be a great leader or a savior or any of these things. I'm kind of doubtful on a lot of his ability to do any of that stuff. But I do think Trump is kind of the man for the job as it exists at the moment, which is just, again, smashing kind of the idols of these people. And a lot of people tell me like, well, if that doesn't need to happen anymore, if people don't see it now, they'll never see it. Well, then you need to readjust your understanding of democracy, because there's still lots of people who don't see it. And if you don't think there aren't a lot of people who don't see it, just look at the midterm elections and people's shock at what happened in them. Like, if you really think people understand what's happening at this point, if you think people have gotten the message and it's just so obvious that no one could ignore it, you really then need to reconcile like the way that the vast majority of the right in the mainstream GOP stuff is trying to reconcile this election. Because I think you should understand by now, actually, most of them aren't even close to getting it. And there's still a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah, Trump doesn't seem to hate America and doesn't want to exacerbate its decline, which seems to be what basically every other potential candidate wants to do, including the current president. So I can't see the argument for office again. Necessarily super gung ho about it. I'm open to the possibility he may have learned some lessons, presuming he can even win. But it just seems obvious that it would be preferable to at least have someone in office who wasn't trying to actively destroy the country.
Yeah.
I mean, give the boomers their last heyday. Trump will figure out some way to pump the stock markets again, and we can sort of, get our bearings a little bit. I mean, I don't see a problem with that. A lot of people have a serious moral issue with his failure to protect the unauthorized tourists in the Capitol during his last days in office. And look, I agree on the moral dimension there, but frankly, the fate of 100 or whatever people in a federal prison, like that's just not. We can't let that like determine the fate of the country. Like, I'm sorry, I know that's going to sound callous to some people, and I think it's. I don't mean to underplay what's happening there at all, but it's just like that. That can't be how we make decisions. Is you know it's like this politician didn't behave morally. I'm outraged. It's like what? So like every politician ever? I don't know.
Right.
Like
Again, it's important for people to understand what politics is, but but yeah, I generally agree here. So see you in the camp. Excellent name for $5. Thank you very much. Gen X leadership would be nice. Deboomering with Gen Xers instead of the nightmare scenario of going directly to millennials from boomers. Yeah, I mean, I'm in this weird scenario where I sit right between Gen X and millennials. I guess I'm technically a very old millennial. Um, Millennials are getting very old at this point, for those who don't know. But either way, I mean, most people I think are pretty exhausted with having 70-plus-year-old people running the country. Yes, it would be great if someone who wasn't kind of could see the light at the end of the tunnel, wasn't operating the government. Reduce the chance of dementia in our ruling class. At the same time, that's probably why they're still elevated in the first place, is because guys like Biden are very easily manipulated. But yes, it certainly would be nice if we could move that wheel a little bit. Let's see here. Hazama for $5. Thank you. This is a little unrelated, but do you think the stereotype that right-wing people are less artistic is natural, or was it artificially created? That's a good question. I'm myself an art philistine, so I'm always kind of terrible at answering some of these questions. I've talked to guys like Gio Panchetti, which you should of course check out. I think Gio does a show with the Prudentialist. I know they do a regular show, and then I think it like alternates between their channels. So definitely check in with him, because he's very good at this. I think there are very artistically gifted right-wing people, but I think that I think the conservative mindset is probably less artistically minded, and we kind of assume that that conservative and right wing are the same at this point. I tend to think of conservative as a disposition and right wing as an actual political orientation. So if you were saying, are conservatives less likely to be artistic, I would say yes. If you're saying, are right wing people less likely to be artistic, I would say that's less likely, though possible. I think that's a little less true. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Charlemagne. Right wing art.
yeah, I think it's kind of obvious that liberals are just better at art, and that's fine. Trying to you're always going to have more liberal-minded people in society. That's fine. They're probably going to be the ones making the more interesting art, because they're going to break more boundaries. This is just sort of a tension in every society that just exists, and that's fine. Right-wing art does tend to be cringe. That's a problem. Not sure if we should stop making art and try something else, or if there is like a way around that. I don't know.
Well, it's Pareto, right? Your type 1 residues are gonna be your artists. But you just want them to be less degenerate, right? Like like you want to have some type 1s that are willing to do combinations and explore things, but without completely falling off the map.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hear. We got Scratchy McDup Waffle here. I think we're just doing the sticker, but always great. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your donation there. Let's see. All right, I think we made it through everybody, guys. So thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, make sure that you check out Charlemagne's links there below. Make sure you're checking out the Old Glory Club as well. Like Charlemagne mentioned, I'm going to be over there on Friday doing their stream, talking about the reaction to kind of Trump's announcement. We touched on a few things here, but we'll get far more in depth, I'm sure, on kind of the substance of Trump's announcement, what it means for the future, the different kind of policy positions. He said some things that sounded based, but I'm sure we'll kind of delve deeper into what the chances are, what those look like, how promising they'd be, that kind of things. But once again, thanks to Charlemagne for joining me. Thanks to everyone with your questions and everything. And as always, oh, hold on, we got one more here. Glow in the dark, $2. Thank you very much. Libs are gatekeepers of art. I think that's probably, I think that's definitely true. They are definitely in control of many of those outlets that deem what art is today, if nothing else. All right, guys. So have a good one, and as always, we'll talk to you next time.